kind of transition us here from the discussions that sound really robust around your tables, good discussions this morning, to a time where we can dig just a little bit deeper for the next few minutes into this subject for today. For those of you that are new with us this morning, we have been working our way through the Ten Commandments all summer long, and looking at each one of them, digging into them, kind of looking at both what was originally intended in the Old Testament and now what is more what we might call the New Covenant, or the new perspective that Jesus provided to us as he taught when he walked around the earth with us so many years ago. And the record of that, of course, being in what we call the Bible, the Old and the New Testaments. And so we have been working our way through that. In the Old Testament commandments can be found in a couple of different places, but we've been looking at them from the book of Exodus. And so our verse for today that we've been looking at around the tables a little bit is "Do not covet," from Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. And it says specifically, different versions will say it slightly different, but it says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." Whether you look there, over in Deuteronomy 5, or at different parts of Scripture, you'll get the same idea. This is the 10th commandment, and so we are at the end of our survey of the 10 commandments with this particular Sunday. The word covet actually means to desire or to take pleasure in. The Hebrew word is chamad. It's spelled C-H-A-M-A-D, chamad, and it means to desire or to take pleasure in. And I think it's important for us not to trivialize. I think in our modern culture we have this idea of what it means to desire something, to take pleasure in. I don't want to trivialize what it means to covet. For instance, the other night, my kids pull out the ice cream, right? And they get a bowl of ice cream, and I'm looking at that bowl of ice cream, and I want a bowl of ice cream. So I desire a bowl of ice cream to go along with what my kids are doing. It's not necessarily coveting, although I'm assessing that, right? The Lord's dealing with me on these things, right? But that would maybe water it down just a little too much, right? I mean, to covet is a little bit more serious, potentially very destructive. I mean, you look at some of the things that are listed there, and you can think of some of the things in your own heart and own life. To covet is something a little bit deeper, maybe a lot deeper. It's more focused. It's something that kind of wells up within us. We can't let it go. It doesn't escape us. And it lingers, and it just kind of festers inside of us. So, how many of you recognize what this machine is? You'd have to have lived basically in the 80s if you're going to understand what that machine is. Jeff has got his fingers up. What is it, Jeff? It's an Atari, yes. And if you look at the games, there's Asteroids and Pac-Man, and that was my gaming system when I was growing up. So, except for the fact that I didn't have one, and my parents never owned one. But my friends, the Crosses, they did. If they ever listen to this message, Paul and David and Brian, you had the Atari. And I would always want to go over to their house, kind of like my own kids want to go to their friend's house to play Xbox One and PS4, because we don't have that. We just got the old Xbox 360. But I didn't have the Atari. I know, right? It's terrible, right? It's awful. But the idea really was that Atari was something that I really, really wanted. I loved playing video games. I don't know where my kids get it from, and sometimes it frustrates the daylights out of me now, but I didn't have one. And so there were like ways in my head and in my brain that I was always scheming, how could I get an Atari? I mean, I was even so bold once in a while to ask my friends if I could borrow it. Could I bring it home? Because I wasn't done playing, and they got to play it all the time. They mastered all these games, and whenever I play, I'd get killed just like that, or whatever the thing was, right? Pac-Man, I could not master Pac-Man. Anyway, you get the idea. Like, that was, to me, kind of my first experience with really kind of wanting something that I couldn't get. As I grew, and I'll tell you some stories of different things in my life as I move along this morning, but it's been different things throughout my life. Cars and houses and flowers and furniture and you name it. Like, there's just been things in my life that when I look at them, they're really attractive to me. So that's the idea that we're getting at here when we talk about coveting. It's something that somebody else has that I really want, and to an extent, I work in my mind or even tangibly to try and figure out how to get it. So a couple of things for us to consider, and the first one is, and I just want to draw a distinction in case somebody makes this parallel in your mind, coveting does not equal, that's a not equal sign, does not equal lust. Now, how are they different? Just real quickly, to covet something is to covet something very specifically. So, for instance, you saw the list. If your neighbor has something that you really, really want, you saw they got that lawnmower that you just really, really need, right? If you're own a home and you need a lawnmower and they've got it and you want it, and to covet would be to put your object of your need, your desire onto one specific thing. Lust, however, is something slightly different. Lust is something more general. In nature, it's a little bit more general, like I have this feeling, I have this urge, and I have these desires, but it doesn't really matter how I fulfill them. I need to have them fulfilled somehow. So lust is slightly different than coveting. Coveting is, I know what I want, and I'm going to go get it because I see that you have it, or something along those lines. So play around with that in your mind a little bit. Coveting also, in this particular instance, deals with desires. And I want to just make the point that as we've been moving along in our 10 Commandments, you'll notice that the 10 Commandments up to this point have been about very specific things, right? Do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not bear false witness. There are things that you and I can see, and the Israelite people could have seen, and they could send somebody to a court, or they could even put somebody in prison or jail, and in certain cases they could even put them to death. But those are things that you can see. Why does God kind of put this last one here, do not covet? Like, I can't tell what Mark's thinking right now. I can't tell what he's desiring. It could be watch the football game this afternoon. His brain could be, but I don't know that. He could be totally right with me right now. Why does God put this idea of do not covet? I wasn't asking for an answer there, Mark. No, just kidding. But why does God put coveting in the mix? Because I can't enforce it. I can't deal with it. And I want to unpack that one for us just a little bit, because I think at the end of the day, if I continue to tell you what not to do, but at the end of the day, your heart still is telling you, I want to do that, have we really changed anything? Have we really gotten underneath the surface? And I think God was already fully aware. You guys agree that God might have been fully aware of human nature and what our desires and our tendencies are? God was already fully aware of how we think, right? So he knew he could tell us not to do a whole bunch of things, but he also knew that if we didn't deal with what was going on in our desires and in our heart, that over the long term, things probably wouldn't necessarily change. So, we can't just stop doing all the outward things. We have to begin to turn the lens a little bit inward. Now, the Bible has a story about this, and it's the story from Joshua chapter 6 and 7. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but some of you will remember a person by the name of Aiken. So Moses is dead. Just paint the picture. Moses is dead, and Joshua has taken over the people of Israel, and they're about to walk into what God had promised them, called the Promised Land. And Joshua has this vision, and God is leading them, and there is conquest happening, and they're going to go in and take over some cities, and ultimately the land that God promised is going to be theirs. Now, they've just had this significant victory in Jericho. They've walked around the outside, and the walls have fallen, and if you know that story, it was a pretty amazing story of God's faithfulness. They didn't fire a shot, they took over the whole city of Jericho, right? So, that's all just happened, and God has said, I want you to take the gold and the silver and some of the iron and some of that good stuff, and I want you to keep it, set it apart for the treasury, for my people. I want you to put that in the treasury. All right, so that's chapter 6. All is well. maybe there's still a little bit of smoke burning from what's gone on there and the fires that have happened around Jericho. And somebody by the name of Aiken, he notices some things. He notices that there was this really fine, valuable robe from Babylon. And he's like, this is, what's going to happen to that robe? And then he found some silver, 200 pieces of silver. And he found this gold bar, and this gold bar was like worth something to him. And he decided that he was just going to take and keep that for himself. And he went and he buried it around his tent. And all of a sudden, the Israelites are now on to their next conquest, and it's the town of Ai, literally Ai, right? I don't know how you even say it other than that. It's Ai. They're on to take over this next town of Ai, and what's going on? They spy it out, they look at the land, and they're like, Joshua, don't even worry about this one. There's hardly anybody there. Just send us with like 2,000 or 3,000 people, and if you send us with 2,000 or 3,000, we're going to take care of this, and we'll move on. Don't trouble the whole army with this one. Well, they've just had this great victory. They're feeling all proud of themselves. And they go up to this little town of Ai, and this little town of Ai defeats them soundly, pushes them back. Well, no victory there, right? So it pushes them back, and Joshua and the people, they fall on their knees, and they're like, God, why would you do this to us? You promised us this land and all this, and if you're just going to send us to get slaughtered, what are we doing? Why are we going? And God's like, Joshua, get up. Let's talk about this. Get off your knees because you got some problems. You got some sin in the camp. That's kind of where that phrase comes from. You've got some sin in the camp. And he talks and he goes and he shows Joshua. Long story short, he shows Joshua through a series of events that this person, Aiken, is the responsible person for why the town of Ai defeated them. And he allows Aiken, he confronts Aiken and he says, you know what, Aiken, I need you to tell me the truth. What did you do? And Aiken's like, I saw some things that I really, really wanted, and I took them. Even though I know I shouldn't, even though I know it was wrong, and even though God told us what to do with that, I wanted them. And it doesn't go well for Aiken. You can read the rest of the story. It doesn't go well for Aiken, but the sin is found out, and things are they get things back in line, so to speak. And Aiken is out of the picture now, and his family, and there's some severe consequences for violating that commandment. And eventually they go on, they defeat Ai, and you can read the rest of the story there. But severe consequences for coveting. If I said earlier that coveting does not equal lust, then really what does coveting equal? And you read a little bit about that. Coveting equals idolatry as it is related to us in the New Testament. And Paul relates to us, as you read in Ephesians chapter 5. Some of your translations use the word greedy. Some of them use the word covetousness. But the idea there is that we are putting value on something. And I'm going to come back to that idea that what we value, we don't value things we don't covet things we don't value, is what I'm trying to say. What we value, and if it gets too much in our minds, it elevates itself to a place of becoming an idol in our life. And that's what Paul is equating it to. So, Jesus kind of used this perspective. I mentioned that the shift here in the Ten Commandments is to move us inside ourselves. Not just our acts, but now what's going on inside of us. And Jesus kind of made reference to this. You can read about it in Mark chapter 7. He was talking about the food and the idea of the food that was sacrificed to idols. And there was this question like, should I eat certain foods and shouldn't I eat certain foods and all of that sort of thing. And they asked Jesus, and Jesus was like, you know what? It doesn't necessarily matter what goes into your mouth. It's what comes out of your mouth that really matters. For what comes out of your mouth flows from your heart. And there's a real direct parallel back to these 10 commandments and to the whole theme and tenor of Scripture that it's all about what's inside of us. We can clean up the outside. We can change the way we act. We can change the way we do things. But if we haven't touched the inside, if we haven't changed the way we think, if we haven't changed the objects and the affections of our desires, then it's not going to last. It's not going to really affect the kinds of changes that we're looking for. And so we're getting at the idea here that it's all about what goes on inside of our hearts. Coveting is an act that really flows from discontentment or even idolatry in our hearts. It's this sense that I don't have enough. I'm not grateful, I'm not thankful, whatever it is, but there's this sense that I need and that I want more. And this is where I want to come back to this idea of value. So think about this idea. I said earlier, we don't covet what we don't value. Think about those things in your life. Like, what are some of those things that you really covet? I saw a commercial earlier this summer, and I tried desperately to find it for you because it makes the point so beautifully, but I could not find it. But the commercial is this. There is, it just happens to be women. It's not about women, but this commercial was women, so I'm just going to use that as the example, all right? But this woman is in her office, and somebody else in the office notices that she's wearing a really cool pair of shoes, all right? And within seconds, it shows she pulls up her phone, and with a one click, boom. Next frame is she's wearing the shoes. And she's wearing a nice flowery dress. Well, she's out walking, and somebody notices the really flowery dress. Pulls up the phone, boom, one click, and next frame, she's wearing the flowery dress. And it goes on, next one, she's wearing the flowery dress and has a really beautiful handbag. Somebody else notices the handbag, boom, pulls out the phone, one click, boom. Now she's got the handbag. You see how this goes, right? The advertising was just so profound as it related to, and I was thinking about this way back then, it just plays on our covetousness. It plays on our need to have what you have. The whole idea was, I need what you got. I want that pair of shoes, that dress, that ham, you name it. Could have been anything. But the advertising was geared to know exactly how we're wired. And it worked. And not only is it easy to just get what you want, like now with Amazon and Prime and all, one click and it's there in 2 days and boom, you're set. Don't get me going on the fact that it goes on a credit card and it puts you in debt and all that kind of stuff, right? That's a whole separate sermon, and we've had those sermons, right? But you get the idea that we live in a culture that is just, it's so profound how much we are enticed by the things that are around us. I wonder how much we even realize that we covet. There's so much of social media, and I'm about to step on a lot of toes here, just a forewarning, all right? There's a whole lot of social media that is built around the idea of coveting. Some of you might recognize Pinterest up there. I actually put in church decor just because, seemed benign a little bit. But think about Pinterest. Why do you go to Pinterest? You're looking at what other people have and what other people do, and you're trying to potentially reproduce it in your own life and in your own mind. And I could have gone any number of directions, right? Social media is so fraught with trying to entice us to get what we don't have, or to make us feel like we need something. Or you could be on Facebook, you could be on anywhere, and you're trolling and you're looking, and you're in your mind's eye, if you're really honest with yourself, there's a lot of, I wish I had that, or ooh, I like that, or ooh, I want that, or it's built. It plays off of these tendencies towards covetousness. Getting an idea, fair enough. It's not a bad thing to go get some ideas and spark some creativity, and a lot of people use Pinterest for that reason. But here's a simple test I was thinking about. If what you're looking at, Pinterest, anything, if what you're looking at says, if it forms in your mind or it comes out of your mouth, you say, ooh, I want that. That's kind of like coveting. It's covetous. Ooh, I want that. It's playing deep down desires within ourselves of discontentment, or I need this, or I need that. Before I go too much further, I want to come back to this idea about value. We desire that which, and we pursue that which we value. Think about something that you've worked really hard for. Or think about something that you've saved a lot of money to do. I know, you know, that it takes a lot of sacrifice. It requires something of us. My example for this, and this is where coveting kind of takes a slightly deeper turn in my own life, from Ataris to something slightly different, right? When I was growing up, I had a lot of friends, and I'll just make this story short. I had a lot of friends who were applying to really good schools, some Ivy League schools. I went to high school with some kids that really were pretty smart, and they were applying to all these places. And I went to Roberts Wesleyan College, and Roberts Wesleyan College is a great school, fantastic school. We have some students here from RWC today. Fantastic school. I'm an alum. I love it. But at some level, I was comparing in my mind RWC versus like Georgetown University or some of the Ivy League schools or something like that. And there was something inside of me that just felt like maybe I wasn't measuring up. I wasn't keeping up with my peers from high school. And so I kind of set my heart and my desire on going to a really good school for my master's program. And so I applied to the University of Chicago and got accepted. And I spent 2 years, 2 hard-earned years, earning a master's in public policy from the University of Chicago. Great experience, and I can tell you lots of good stories about that, but the point I'm trying to make for this sermon and this moment is I sacrificed a ton. I sacrificed a ton. My wife sacrificed a ton. My 2 oldest children sacrificed a ton. I sacrificed so much in trying to get that degree, working full-time and going to school full-time, that within weeks of my graduation, I was in the hospital and I was flat on my back, having had back surgery because I had 2 herniated discs from all the stress. I sacrificed so much. I placed so much value on getting that degree from that particular school that I sacrificed a lot in the rest of my life to get it. And as I've reflected on that, I have had a great experience. I've had great memories. I've had great results come out of that. I learned a ton. I mean, it was a great experience. But as I've reflected on that, so much of my motivation, just to be honest with you, so much of my motivation about that experience was rooted all the way back in high school from all of my friends who went to all these big schools, and I just had to prove myself. I had to go to a school to prove that I could keep up with some of my friends. There was so much pride, and there was so much coveted about their experience versus what I perceived my own experience. It really had so much less to do with getting a public policy degree and so much more to do with proving that I could do it at a big school. That's coveting. And I've been examining some of that in my own life for many years, ever since, and certainly this sermon kind of conjures up some of those thoughts again. But I highlight that story again just to highlight what lengths we are sometimes willing to go to get what we want. And you know, God knows our hearts, doesn't He? You guys believe that? God knows our hearts. He knows what we're capable of. I think He put the 10th commandment in place to remind us that we will desire what we value. And then there's like some circular thinking there, right? Because it's the 10th commandment, which takes us all the way back to the first and the second commandments. Just to kind of put a neat little way to tie this all together, if I desire what I value, and in the first commandment it says, I am the Lord your God, there shall be no other gods before me, and then the second commandment is, you shall not make an idol before me, right? It's what I desire, where I place the desire, that helps me to focus on the one true God and not put idols in. And you see how this kind of circles back around on itself? You can kind of look at it that way. We have to get straight in our hearts and in our lives. We have to take authority over all the distractions in our lives so that we can become and grow like Christ. King David in the Old Testament wrote a psalm, and he wrote a psalm late in his life that speaks to this. Psalm 37. And he cautions us through his age and through his wisdom that we are not to look at the world around us, those who are prospering, to get starry-eyed with their stuff and have greed and covetousness for them. But our hope is to be rooted in God. And I'm going to read the first 7 verses. You should read the whole psalm. It's a really rich psalm. It says, and you can read it along with me here, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." I think David is speaking here of the way that we counteract, the way we deal with a covetous heart, a heart that is misguided and discontent. And it has to do with, and we've talked about this throughout the summer, this idea of trusting. Where do I place my trust? Who do I trust? God sees your needs. God knows your desires. God knows even what you care about, even though you might try to fool him about that once in a while. But what he wants is for you to care about him more than anything else that you desire. And he makes a lot of promises for those that will put him first. And here I'm not talking about the prosperity doctrine that says if you do this, you'll be rich and wealthy. It's not those kind of promises. It's the kind of promise that says you will be with me in paradise, in eternity. You will be with me, and I've got rooms for you, and I've got all kinds of stuff promised for those who will persevere with him and give him their heart and their life. But you have to be firmly rooted in a belief and a faith that God alone is worth the sacrifice. That's kind of how we deal with and test our hearts. Is God alone worth the sacrifices that I make for him? Because if he's not, you'll find yourself probably walking down these rabbit trails and desiring other things in your life. So I come back to wrap it up this morning. I say, do you trust in God? Is God worth more than all the things that you're striving after? If there were nothing more than God and his promises of eternity, would that be enough for you? Your answer to that may help you determine how much the stuff in your life has a hold on you. And I'll close with this thought that, stuff and money and power and prestige, none of those things in and of themselves are bad. Jesus, when he was talking to a person we know in the New Testament, we know by the name of the rich young ruler. We don't really have a name for him, but the rich young ruler, and this rich young ruler came and was asking Jesus how he might have eternal life and get to know God and love God with all his heart and all this. And Jesus said to him, he said, "Go and sell everything you have, and then come and follow me." And the rich young ruler looked back at him, and I can just imagine just kind of slinking away. I don't think I can do that. And that's really the test for all of us. How much does our stuff have a hold on us? And how much are we desiring and clamoring for more and more and more? How many of us would be willing to sell it all just to follow Christ? I think that for those of us, myself included today, who fall into that camp, where it would be really hard to sell everything we have, that this message on coveting, this message on idolatry, this message of what do I put my value on, that's the message that's really speaking to us today. And God is speaking to your heart, He's certainly been speaking to my heart. So a few things for you to take away from the message today, and that is, and just reiterating, as we've said multiple times throughout this series, God cares about the heart. Yes, He cares about how you live, the things that you do. That's important. The world's watching those things, and it should be important to us how we live. But it needs to flow from our heart. Number two, be wary of the cultural pull to covet. It's all around you. It's all around me. It's all around us. There is a pull, and there are ploys developed that are just based upon the natural instinct to covet. Consider the pull your stuff has on you. Take a look at all the things you own. Think about what draws you, what attracts you, what keeps you, what motivates you. Consider that. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. That's Matthew and the first part of chapter 5, what we call the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Talk about an antidote to coveting. Let's desire these greater things. And then, as I've said before throughout this series, figure out for you what that next right thing to do is. Don't try to map out all these grand changes to your life and the changes you're going to make and the desires of your heart. Just think about it today. What's that next right thing for you as it relates to this message, as it relates to what God is saying to you today? What is that next right thing to do? And if you do the next right thing that's right to do, you're going to be on the path to dealing with all of this stuff. I'd like to invite the worship team to come back up. I'm going to pray, and we're going to transition to the next part of our service. But I pray that the Lord is speaking to you today, and I pray that your hearts and your minds are open, that you're listening. I think we can see, and I hope you've seen throughout this series, that the Ten Commandments aren't just Old Testament laws and irrelevant for today. The Ten Commandments have a ton to offer, and were referenced repeatedly by Jesus and the apostles throughout the New Testament. But this idea of getting at the heart, and that's at the heart of what Jesus was all about. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the way you have been speaking to us and working with us, Lord. I thank you for the privilege of exploring and digging a little deeper into your word, of unpacking not only what, God, you gave to Moses, but also through your son Jesus, the interpretations and the other ways of thinking about these things that really get to the core of the matter, that is our heart, and the transformation that you are hoping and praying we experience. You love us, God, and you don't want us to be persuaded by the world. You want us to be consumed with you. And when that happens, Lord, all these things, you say, but seek first your kingdom and your righteousness, and all these things will be added to you, Lord. When we put you first, when we seek you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, when we love our neighbor as ourselves, when we put you first, Lord, just the potential, Father, is so significant. So I pray, Lord, that you will speak to us today. I pray that you will change us from the inside out, and that what we've heard today will continue to linger in our hearts according to your will and your Spirit. I thank you now, and I praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. On your tables, you have a card that looks like this.